Hi, welcome to my talk on creative research. My name is Josh Unsworth, and I'm a game designer and writer on Old World by Mohawk Games. To give some context, Old World is a 4X strategy game set in the ancient world. One of the central changes to the genre formula is the introduction of characters. These are leaders and courtiers who have relationships, opinions, and traits, creating a constantly shifting strategic landscape. The game uses a storylet system with events which are triggered through different actions and states. Virtually anything, whether capturing a city, converting your religion, or discovering a new landmark, can result in an event where the player makes a decision that feeds back into the game. In my year and a half on Old World, I've designed and written just over 1,000 of these events. The game itself now has well over 4,000. Although the ancient world is a relatively limited scope, at least compared to the entirety of human history portrayed by some other games, the events I've worked on still cover everything from combat, intrigue, religion, diplomacy, and education, with nations from vastly different cultures and customs interacting. One of my main goals whilst writing these events has been to capture some of the variety and humanity of the ancient world, which has required thorough and in-depth research. Going into the project, I had a baseline knowledge of the setting as I studied ancient history at university, although 10 years later it's questionable how much I can actually remember. Researching for academia and creative work are two completely different practices. In my previous work co-running a micro-indie studio, it was essential to be able to develop ideas quickly, adapting and learning new technical and creative techniques from different fields. On Old World, I've had the chance to combine different research methods I've used throughout my career for one ongoing project. Creative research is seeking the answer to a question we have about what we're writing. There are two main goals often intertwined. The first is to build a feeling of credibility and trust in the world. It's not just about getting every detail right, but about building a weight and believability in the space. The second goal of research is to create new ideas and to find points of interest. As Hannah Nicklin says in her book about writing, as professionals we can't always rely on inspiration. Research is a way of finding connections that spark interest, and the better we are at it, the more lucky we will be in our search. However, research takes time. In a creative project, this often means that the vast majority is done at the start. But then what about the things that we find during the process? And how do we know when to move on to creation? It's easy to be drawn into a continuous loop of research, making us feel like we started the creative work, when really things will change the moment we put pen to paper. Making games is an iterative process, and it's important that our research exists within and supports that structure. At its best, the research will interweave with development, and from my experience, this is the ideal state of working. Rather than a few sprawling sessions that break up creation, we want to use it regularly as part of the cycle. The research gives inspiration for creation, which then raises questions to research. As with any creative practice, it's worth taking time to reflect and question our process at each step, so that we can make the most out of it. The first area to talk about is what I think of as passive research, and this is an ongoing process throughout a project, starting before we even know what questions we want answered. It's the process of setting up systems to quickly and easily capture sources of inspiration, storing them in a personal library of ideas where they can continue to grow and blend together. This long-term mentality takes the pressure off trying to read and absorb everything as soon as you come across it. With the internet, there's an overwhelming amount of information and inspiration. If you're like me, then it can feel as if you have to take in new sources immediately, or they'll be forgotten. But when I've tried this before, it breaks focus and becomes a fast route to burning out. In productivity, there's the idea of the second brain. It's the concept of setting up a system that does a lot of the work for you, freeing your concentration for the important things. The idea is the same here. We want to create a system that makes it easy to find, capture and store ideas as easily as possible, so it's okay if they're forgotten in the short term, as they're stored for when we need them. This breaks down into two parts, sources and capture tools. There are a number of programs for gathering streams together, and the ideal here is to have one or two places where you can get uncluttered inspiration that's relevant to you. Programs like TweetDeck can be fantastic tools for finding inspiration, especially for art and resources, as one of the great things about our industry is how willing people are to share their processes and techniques. There is also so much incredible information in newsletters and blogs. I suggest using a tool like eNoReader to gather these all into one place, as it means less distraction and makes them easy to follow. The danger with setting up these systems is that it's easy to fall into a hoarder behaviour, so it's vital to have an ongoing process of maintaining and adjusting your feeds, adding new sources and removing any that are more noise than music. Where possible, I suggest using tags, but otherwise having minimal separation and organisation. As well as saving time, there is a creative advantage to storing the inspiration that you save unsorted in one place. It's been my experience that good ideas come from the friction of unexpected things colliding together. So, by storing them all in one place, we are maximising the chances of interesting connections and juxtaposition to generate ideas that we never would have thought of. These systems are useful for a single project, but also for ongoing learning. I have them set up for Old World, and also for general game and narrative design resources. Once you find a system that works well for you, it's then easy to upkeep and adjust as needed. If you want to look more into this, then I suggest watching Tynan Sylvester's GDC talk on the Ludian method. It's a production method he uses to capture and sort game design ideas, but inspired a lot of how and why I set up these passive research systems. Next is active research. As we find these sources of inspiration, questions will start to form about your work. They can be narrow questions, looking for a specific term or event, or as wide as questioning if there's a game or story in a theme or topic. This is where the active research comes in. We interview a series of sources, following the trail to find an answer to the question. With the internet, there are a large number of tools right at our fingertips for this. The first and easiest to use are search engines, although they're not as simple as they might first seem. Search engines are becoming increasingly SEO and algorithm based, providing a very curated list full of advertised pages. If we ask different search engines how did Babylon fall, you can see that they also try to give an absolute dead-end answer with little context, collapsing all the messy complexity that the fall of a civilization entails into a single line. Wikipedia is another great tool with some important caveats. You can never know who wrote an article, and it's important to remember that each one is a summary of a vastly deeper topic. However, it is fantastic for quickly jumping between related topics, and finding the terms and details you need to know to search elsewhere. YouTube has videos on practically anything, but very few videos reference their sources, so it's really important to check the accuracy of the details elsewhere. JSTOR is a website for academic journals. You can access 100 papers a month with a free account. It might seem obvious, but the introduction and conclusion contain the main arguments in the journal article, so reading those first gives a good idea of the points the article is trying to make, and if the contents will be useful. They can still be quite dense to read, so journal reviews can be a great way of getting a quick overview of a topic. Many universities are now doing free online learning, although most of the courses are based around technical and scientific subjects. There's a surprising array, so it's worth checking them out. Many museums are also going through the process of digitising their collections and making them accessible online, with high-res images and descriptions of objects. With books, local libraries often give access to a surprising amount of online material, and it's worth checking if you can order books in. The selection might be larger than you think. Check for any public libraries in cities and institutions nearby. For example, in London I've made use of the British Library, the National Art Library at the V&A, the Wellcome Trust and the BFI Library for Old World. Often you can't take away from these places, but they have amazing collections and reading rooms. The prices for academic books can be particularly punishing, but you can find second-hand copies for cheap online. And follow people, especially experts in the field and people who regularly share sources. Getting an insight into their world and the resources they use is invaluable, and don't be afraid to reach out and ask experts and professionals. It's often the best way to learn about anything. Most people want to share what they know. However, be respectful of their time and really think about the questions that only they will know the answers to. You might only get one shot at talking to them. Wherever you're looking for source material, it's worth checking who wrote it. People can say anything, especially online, and it's always worth the extra time to check the author, their previous work, and to think of what biases they might have, and why they're writing from the viewpoint they are. Unless it's an original or counter item, the creator is trying to make their own point or tell a story for their audience. So just be aware that there's been this existing translation in the details. While researching, it's useful to keep a record of your trail. It can be as messy as needed, just a page on Google Sheets with a list of hyperlinks copied in, although, if possible, annotations are great. I found it invaluable to be able to jump between sources as needed, and it really helps with staying on track. A detour is always worth taking for the chance it might bring something unexpected to your research, but if you find yourself drifting away from the original question, then it means that you can go back to the last relevant point. So the notes we have from research are not the end of the process. What comes next is an act of translation, as we take our findings and work out how best to use them in the game. The constructed systems and context of a game are never the same as those in the real world, so there's a number of considerations in how we use our research. Research is not all about facts, but the experience it creates for the player. It's very easy to get excited about the things you find, but not everything has a place in the game, and that's okay. Trying to directly show the player all the things you found is like explaining a meme. The context is lost and the effect just doesn't translate. Even something as simple as finding the name for a specific tool raises questions about its effect on the game. Will the player know what this tool is without explanation? Will it hamper their ability to use it? Would using a modern term be better? What subtleties would be gained or lost from this? There are also ethical considerations. Everything that you decide to either include or exclude in the game's story and systems is making some kind of commentary, even if not intended. It's a part of our role as creators to take responsibility for this, and to respect the material we find, which is often someone else's lived experience. Question your preconceptions and assumptions going into the process, and even if you're the right person to be telling the story. In the end, there's no one right way to use your research. It's a question of sensitivity and taste. What I've presented here is not at all a prescriptive method. Instead, it's an invitation for you to reflect on your own practice to find a system that works well for you. Research is a playful practice. It's about discovering the unexpected interest and wonder in our world, and translating that into a compelling experience for the player. No matter what process you use, keep this curiosity and humanity at the heart of it, and you can't go far wrong. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this talk. I really hope it's been helpful. This has been a very brief overview, so if you have any questions about the process, tools, or anything else, please don't hesitate to email me. Thanks again.